So welcome everybody to the SOAS Centre for Yoga Studies, whether you're in the virtual room with us just now or you're catching up later with the recording. I'm Dr. Ruth Westerby, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Marleen Thaler to the SOAS Centre of Yoga Studies for her lecture with us tonight. So I'll do a brief introduction and we'll go to her presentation. Marleen Thaler holds a PhD in religious studies from a couple of years ago, along with additional degrees in social and cultural anthropology and Oriental studies, all from the University of Vienna. She has been a research fellow at ETH Zurich and UC Santa Barbara, California. She served as a scholar in residence at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, and studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Currently, she is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Graz and is also employed at the University of Vienna's Research Centre, Religion and Transformation in Contemporary Society. At Vienna, she also explores the use of machines in alternative religion, which I'm intrigued by. Marleen has co-edited a volume on subtle energies with Brill last year and is currently finalising her monograph on John Mitchell's sacred place theory with Equinox. She's preparing to publish her dissertation on the modern history of Kundalini's transformation, and it is on that topic that Marleen is speaking with us tonight. I think that Marleen's work is absolutely fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to what she has to share with us. During the webinar, there's a Q&A function that is available, so please write your questions into the chat as they come to you, and we'll have a chance to discuss your reflections with Marleen at the end. So thank you ever so much, Marleen, for being here, and over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for this really kind introduction, and thank you to Jackie and the SOAS Center for Yoga Studies for inviting me. I will just try to share my slides. Let's see if that works. Can you see my slides?
That's
Yay, good. That's cool. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is based on my dissertation, as Ruth already mentioned, which mainly looked at the modern Kundalini discourses and more specifically at the Kundalini's scientification and globalization in the latter half of the 20th century. These developments must be seen against the backdrop of global cultural flows and transculturation, which, with modern ideas of Kundalini representing products of transculturation, of transcultural exchange. While the global reception history of Kundalini was a main focus of my research, I find it particularly fascinating how these modern processes also shaped and transformed the reception of Kundalini in South Asia. And this is exactly what I would like to address today. I will look at Kundalini's reinterpretation as a vital component of Indian cultural heritage on the part of Indian politicians, authors, physicians, and journalists. I would like to begin this presentation with a short letter written in 1975 by the former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She directed her note to R.K. Karanjia, an Indian journalist and editor of the Indian tabloid Blitz. Let's see. Yes. So Gandhi writes, "Dear Sri Karanjia, just a line to thank you for giving me Sri Gopi Krishna's book. I read it on my last tour in Gujarat and found it fascinating. It is strange that no or so little research has been attempted on such a vital subject, or perhaps this is not known. With regards, yours sincerely, Indira Gandhi." Gandhi mentions the Indian pandit Gopi Krishna in this letter. By 1975, Krishna had achieved some recognition for his autobiography, Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man, which he published in 1967. And Gandhi, however, refers in her letter to The Biological Basis of Religion and Genius, which was published in 1972, excuse me. And it's a book co-published by Krishna and the eminent German physicist and philosopher Carl Friedrich Freiherr von Weizsäcker. Karanjia, a fervent supporter of Krishna himself, had presented the book to Indira Gandhi. From her letter, one might assume the book made a lasting impression on her, calling it fascinating. More interesting for us, however, is her remark regarding the presumed lack of research on what she considered such a vital topic. The topic Indira Gandhi is referring to is nothing other than the tantric concept of Kundalini. As I will demonstrate in this lecture, Gandhi's indirect request did not go unanswered. Under her government, research into Kundalini and the dissemination of its knowledge, or perhaps it's better to say its specific interpretations, developed into a prioritized subject. And as we will see, Gopi Krishna played a key role in these developments. I want to divide this lecture in 3 parts. First, I will briefly introduce Kundalini and discuss mainly its transformation from the late 19th century onwards. After that, I will introduce Gopi Krishna and his role in Kundalini research. And third, I will discuss some findings of my archival research about the political use of Kundalini under the Gandhi administration. A special emphasis will be laid on government-funded Kundalini research and the Kundalini Yoga series in the tabloid Blitz. So let me begin with Kundalini. Kundalini means she who is coiled, signifying the power of the divine feminine, Shakti. Ideas of Kundalini originated in medieval South Asian Tantra and Yoga texts, where it was conceptualized as a key component of subtle body models and venerated as a goddess. Moreover, tantric sources frequently envisioned Kundalini as a dormant serpent that lies coiled at the entrance of the central channel of the yogic subtle body. The sources further describe how Kundalini can be stimulated by yogic practices, resulting in a rise through the central channel to the crown of the head. Of Kundalini's twofold understanding as a subtle energy notion and a goddess, particularly its interpretation as an energy concept, played the most significant role in its transmission history. It is crucial to keep in mind that Kundalini has been interpreted in various ways, depending on factors such as historical period, religious tradition, and associated subtle body models. So assuming a singular, unified concept of Kundalini would therefore be an oversimplification and indeed inaccurate. An observation that is certainly also true for modern adaptations of Kundalini. When considering modern forms of Kundalini, history begins in the late 19th century. From the late 1880s onwards, theosophists, yogis, Hindu reformers, and other South Asian intellectuals expressed a new interest in Kundalini. While motivations for their engagement differed, most of these figures used scientific terminology and theories to interpret the tantric idea. Thereby, pre-modern South Asian views of Kundalini evolved into modern Kundalini concepts, which ultimately became a globally discussed topic of 20th century religion and science. The tendency to interpret Kundalini through a scientific lens led to the emergence of what I call Kundalini research. Different from a scientific analysis of Kundalini as a religious concept, like what I did in my dissertation, for example, Kundalini research concerns the investigation of Kundalini from an emic perspective, employing scientific means and methods to find evidence for Kundalini's existence. Several primary sources suggest that modern physics, biology, evolutionary theory, and psychology assumed key reference frameworks for such Kundalini research endeavors. As I will explain in a minute, Gopi Krishna serves as a key example of a modern Kundalini researcher. However, Krishna was not the only figure interested in researching Kundalini. During the second half of the 20th century, Kundalini's scientification reached a peak with self-proclaimed researchers initiating research projects in South Asia, Europe, North America, and even Japan. During this period, the corresponding discourse was saturated with religious appropriations of science, with protagonists using scientism as their primal language of faith. 20th century Kundalini researchers operated within the tradition of earlier South Asian and non-South Asian figures who laid the foundation for understanding religion and yoga on the premises of science. Examining the source material, it makes sense to define this late phase of Kundalini's transformation as spanning from the late 1960s to the late 1980s. This period was marked by the international prominence of Gopi Krishna, whose books catalyzed Kundalini's modern heyday. And at this point, I would like to take a closer look with you at Gopi Krishna and illustrate his leading role in modern Kundalini research and his collaboration with the Indian government. The Indian Pandit Gopi Krishna lived most of his life in Kashmir, in the northwest of India. He was brought up in a religious atmosphere and started practicing meditation at a young age. In December 1937, Gopi Krishna experienced a bodily sensation while meditating, which led to various psychosomatic effects. He interpreted this extraordinary experience as the activation of Kundalini. 30 years later, in his book, Kundalini, The Evolutionary Energy in Man, Krishna reflected on his experience. It was Krishna's second book of a total of 17, all of which revolved around, or at least originated from, his initial Kundalini experience. In the books, Krishna maintained that Kundalini was a biological, evolutionary mechanism inherent in every human being, potentially detectable with scientific methods and technological tools. Following his endeavor to read Kundalini experiences through a scientific lens, he started promoting Kundalini research and was soon supported by European and North American collaborators. Moreover, Krishna established a significant fellowship around the world that supported his cause and shared his commitment to Kundalini research. As I have demonstrated in my doctoral thesis, Krishna closely interacted with a range of religious and scientific institutions, thereby embedding his Kundalini research within a global network of practitioners, scholars, and religious protagonists. Together with a growing group of collaborators, Krishna opened 16 branches of what he called Kundalini Research Foundation. Between 1970 and the mid-1980s, this international network expanded across 3 continents, including branches in India, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, France, the UK, the US, and Canada, and more. 8 alone were based in India and 2 in the US, and other branches were planned in Brazil, Japan, and Australia, but never or only halfway realized. So, of all his collaborators, one was particularly important. It was Carl Friedrich Freiherr von Weizsäcker, whom I've already mentioned at the beginning of this lecture as a co-author of The Biological Basis of Religion and Genius. But in fact, Weizsäcker was much more than that. Weizsäcker had a personal interest in South Asian religion and philosophy, particularly after a blissful meditation experience at the tomb of Sri Ramana Maharishi at the Saints Ashram in Tamil Nadu. Weizsäcker decided to support Krishna's cause. It was a life-changing experience for Weizsäcker. So besides co-publishing the book, The Biological Basis of Religion and Genius, Weizsäcker and Krishna also co-established a research foundation based in Germany, and that's different from the Kundalini research foundations that I've just mentioned. So it's another one. This collaboration between Krishna and Weizsäcker is significant given Weizsäcker's position as a respected scholar and scientist in Germany and beyond. His academic profile bestowed legitimacy upon Krishna's Kundalini research and increased his international visibility. Due to Krishna's growing international recognition, interest in his research extended beyond Europeans and Americans. South Asian scientists, politicians, and journalists also grew curious. Indira Gandhi was India's first and only woman prime minister, serving from 1966 to 1977 and again from 1980 until her assassination in 1984. While leading the Congress Party, she publicly supported secularism. However, it is reasonable to see her politics as resonating with Hindu nationalist ideas. Hindu nationalism refers to an ideology that views India as a Hindu majority nation and seeks to align its culture, identity, and often state policies with that perspective. It emerged in late 19th and early 20th century British India, shaped by colonialism, print culture, and reform movements, such as the Arya Samaj. Figures such as Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo shaped its cultural vocabulary, promoting ideas including a reimagined, unified Hindu community, the ancient origins of Hindu ideas, or the image of the nation of India as a mother. As already hinted at the beginning of this lecture, Indira Gandhi had a particular interest in Kundalini and emphasized that India must invest in its research. To her, Kundalini was an ancient Hindu principle that could serve as India's national emblem. After having read Krishna's book, Gandhi recognized Krishna's advocacy for the scientific investigation of Kundalini as a unique opportunity to strengthen India's position in international research endeavors. Consequently, in 1974, she assigned her minister, Karan Singh, with the launch of government-funded Kundalini research projects under Gopi Krishna's guidance. Moreover, these projects and Kundalini research at large were promoted in Karanjia's Kundalini Yoga series, which appeared in the tabloid Blitz between April and May 1976. In the remaining part of this lecture, I would like to illuminate Krishna's collaboration with the Gandhi administration by discussing Karan Singh's and Karanjia's roles in more detail. Let me begin by first introducing Karan Singh. Karan Singh has been a central figure in Indian politics since the 1960s. He was born in 1931 as the son of Sir Hari Singh, the Maharaj of the Dogra dynasty of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. Being the heir of colonial India's largest princely state, Karan Singh's life would have been predetermined as the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. However, with India gaining its independence in 1947, Singh lost his aristocratic privileges. Nevertheless, he remained part of the political elite of the new state, assuming prestigious roles in the Republic of India. This included 2 ministerial positions under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Prior to these positions, Singh had maintained a father-like relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, which also accounted for his close relationship with Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi. Influenced by Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and particularly his ideas about spiritual nationalism, Karan Singh upheld a glowing patriotism and believed in India's political and religious superiority. When Singh encountered Gopi Krishna, he read Krishna's ideas about Kundalini through a religious nationalist lens. According to Singh, Krishna's work helped tie Kundalini to the heritage of what he considered India's wisdom, thereby strengthening the idea of India's religious superiority. Moreover, he was particularly impressed by Krishna's efforts to launch research projects worldwide. In 1973, when they first met, Krishna's collaboration with the German scientist Weizsäcker was at its peak, and Krishna was well known in Europe and North America through his books. Convinced by Krishna's devotion to India and its Hindu heritage, Singh recommended Krishna's ideas to Indira Gandhi. And this was, by the way, before Karan Singh presented Gandhi with Krishna's book. Given Singh's support for Krishna's work, it must have been a natural choice for Gandhi to assign Singh to oversee the government-funded Kundalini projects. Between 1974 and 1977, Gandhi authorized two main projects, both aimed at situating Kundalini in a Hindu nationalist context. There was, on the one hand, the research at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIIMS, and another research project at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS. The research at AIIMS hoped to gain insights into Kundalini's physiological aspects, assuming Kundalini to be a physiological mechanism, an idea that was publicly promoted by Gopi Krishna. At NIMHANS, in contrast, Kundalini's expected links to consciousness were at the center of interest. This emphasis was reflected in the project's designation, Project Consciousness. It is interesting that neither project yielded significant results. In the case of AIIMS, we cannot even be sure when or if the research officially started. However, both exemplify national and international attempts to find scientific evidence for the existence of Kundalini during that period. Furthermore, since they were approved by the Gandhi administration, they underscore the Hindu nationalist interest in Kundalini. Regarding AIIMS, the source material offers valuable insights into the project's concepts and Gopi Krishna's central role therein. Let me therefore say a few words about AIIMS' anticipated Kundalini research. The AIIMS was established in 1956 in New Delhi during the Nehru administration. Aside from medical treatment, a key function of the institute was to provide facilities for research and experimentation. It thus appeared to be an appropriate location for Krishna's collaboration with government-funded Kundalini research. While Karan Singh was the catalyst behind this collaboration, Krishna was first invited by B.K. Anand. All three men are now displayed on the slide. So B.K. Anand was a professor of physiology who played a central role at AIIMS. Anand was interested in the neurophysiological effects of yoga and meditation and had already initiated research into yoga at AIIMS as early as 1961. The new research project should revolve around the neurophysiological effects of presumed Kundalini awakenings. And this is why Gopi Krishna was invited. So both Singh and Anand expected Krishna to guide the research, thus positioning him at the center of the research team. This is an important point because it shows that Krishna was not invited as a research subject, meaning someone who had undergone a Kundalini awakening, but he was invited as a researcher himself. And it is therefore not surprising that several of Krishna's published works were referenced in the research proposal. His books were regarded as authoritative research rather than primary source material of a practitioner, a stance Krishna had attempted to adopt for several years outside of India. The proposal of the AIMS project is titled Yogic Techniques in the Development of Higher Nervous Functions and underscores the scientific and nationalistic interests associated with research into Kundalini. And this picture is from my archival research at the library in Zurich, where the legacy of Gopi Krishna is stored. So the proposal's general introduction offers insights into yoga, Kundalini, and distinct topics associated with Krishna's Kundalini interpretations. In fact, the proposal reads very much like a summary of some of Krishna's central tenets, such as when the proposal remarks that it is tempting to think in line with Gopi Krishna that the concept of Kundalini may be the real biological mechanism underlying the further evolution of human mind. Both aspects, Kundalini as a biological mechanism and as an evolutionary force, were promoted by Krishna throughout his books. Besides highlighting Krishna's role in interpreting Kundalini, the proposal advocates for India's leadership in yoga research. Referring to Anand and others' contributions in the early 1960s, the proposal emphasizes India's initial lead in yoga research, maintaining that yoga is an inalienable ethos of the Indian people. However, as the proposal underscores, over the past decade, this leading role has been surpassed by scientists from other countries. Addressing the potential loss of Indian national pride, the proposal then assesses that it will be a sad reflection on the Indian scientists and on the management of national science policy if India is not able to make a breakthrough in this area of research, and if all such research efforts are left to be pursued by other countries. I find these passages from the proposal particularly interesting as they emphasize yoga not only as an essential part of Indian heritage, but as part of Indian identity. In the context of Hindu nationalism, both yoga and Kundalini were celebrated as essential parts of a presumed ancient Hindu tradition. As a natural consequence, India must assume the leading position in international research on yogic phenomena such as Kundalini. Following this nationalistic urge to resume research into yoga, the final part of the proposal considers the human element of such research. It suggests that yogis and scientists have approached each other, showing more willingness to comprehend the other side. Actually anticipating modern discourses on scholar practitioners and practitioner scholars, the proposal envisions the research project operating on a threshold of mutual understanding. As already indicated, Gopi Krishna was not expected to serve as the project's research subject, a role, again, he never aspired to assume. Instead, the proposal suggests Krishna as the mastermind, quote, behind a somewhat innovative approach transcending the roles of research subjects and researchers. The AIIMS research proposal indicates that the research was already in progress or about to begin at any moment. However, as I've already indicated, there are no signs that it actually started. In hindsight, it seems the project's initial motivation steadily diminished until it stagnated. The most likely reason was the lack of government support, funding, and staff. An outcome that must have been especially frustrating for Krishna, who has been anticipating a research project in India for a long time. However, Singh and the other contributors to the project were also not willing to give up so easily. A final attempt to revive the initial endeavor was a sophisticated marketing strategy. In 1976, the Indian tabloid Blitz featured a series of cover stories revolving around Kundalini, which contributed to Gandhi's agenda to promote Kundalini as a symbol of Hindu nationalism. The driving force behind the campaign was the journalist and owner-editor R.K. Karanjia. Karanjia was born into a wealthy Parsi family and became a journalist for the Times of India. In 1941, he founded Blitz, a weekly tabloid based in Bombay, initially advocating a pro-war stance. However, Blitz soon identified with the independence movement and developed into a popular and internationally renowned newspaper committed to investigative journalism and politics. Despite political differences, Karanjia maintained a strong and friendly relationship with both Nehru and Indira Gandhi. During the 1970s, with the support of Gandhi, Blitz developed into the best-selling weekly newspaper in South Asia. Simultaneously, Blitz developed into the voice of the establishment under Gandhi's government. Consequently, when it published its Kundalini series in 1976, Blitz was at the peak of its success, and the Gandhi administration could rely on Blitz's loyalty. The choice of Blitz as a national platform to contribute to the government's agenda to promote Kundalini as a symbol of Hindu nationalism was therefore by no means arbitrary. Between April 10 and May 3, 1976, Blitz featured a series of 6 cover stories revolving around Kundalini. Under the heading Kundalini Yoga, India's ancient serpent power rediscovered, Karanjia expounded on Kundalini's ties with Indian culture and on the scientific interest in demonstrating Kundalini empirically. The initial 3 articles, released in April, focused on Krishna's life, experience, and interpretation of Kundalini, and offered an overview of current and past Kundalini research projects and concepts. In May, Blitz addressed the topic of Kundalini even more prominently. In addition to 3 follow-up articles of the Kundalini Yoga series, 2 issues also published guest contributions and readers' views. The series painted a clear picture of what was believed to be the global prominence of Gopi Krishna's project while emphasizing Kundalini's South Asian origin. Let's look at some articles in more detail. The initial article demonstrates Krishna's central role in the series. A picture of Krishna, as you can see on the slide, and a letter addressed from him to Karanjia cover over a third of the front page. Part of the inaugural article was also an overview of current Kundalini research endeavors, both on a global and local scale. And all of these pictures, by the way, are also photographs from my archival research. Some of them are better and some of them are worse, so please forgive me for that. So Karanjia particularly underscored Krishna's international network of Kundalini research centers. European and US American individuals such as Weizsäcker, or also the American psychiatrist Lee Zaneller, who some of you might know as the co-founder of the San Francisco-based Kundalini Clinic, So these individuals carried forward associated research endeavors. And all of them, that's interesting, all of them, according to Karanjia, were inspired by Gopi Krishna. The significance of these international projects notwithstanding, Karanjia emphasized how the Indian research projects outshone them all. At the forefront, as Karanjia maintained, was Krishna's collaboration with Karan Singh and their ongoing research at the All India Institute of Medical Science, the AIIMS. And as we have already determined, the notion of ongoing is a bit misleading, given that the project, in fact, never truly began. The May 1 issue was titled The Technology of the technology of Kundalini arousal, questioning whether the experience of Kundalini could be understood as a biological phenomenon and, if so, how it could be demonstrated by scientific means. In essence, the outline of Krishna's Kundalini research project. However, Karanjia recognized that Kundalini's association with the physical body was a contentious issue, particularly given that science had not yet established such a link. To address this dispute, he invited guest contributions and included various opposing viewpoints in his series. A notable example was P.K. Mishra, a retired director of health services in Delhi. In his guest column, Science Cannot Interpret Kundalini Yoga, Mishra strongly challenged Krishna's theories and absolutely rejected Karanjia's claim of Kundalini's modern, quote-unquote, rediscovery. Mishra wrote, "It is incorrect to say that Kundalini Yoga is being rediscovered in this country. There is extensive literature on the subject, and great masters are still alive who can awaken this divine power in an individual." Given that Karanjia's Kundalini Yoga series portrayed Krishna as a great master of Kundalini, Mishra's criticism directly targeted Krishna. And this becomes even more evident in another paragraph where Mishra writes, "Yoga research and investigations by the All India Institute of Medical Sciences are hardly likely to bear fruit unless conducted with the active direction of a master or his disciple, because only a person with an awakened Kundalini can correlate scientific measurements with inner experience." Although Karanjia published Mishra's critical piece, he did not shy away from expressing his own perspective and defending Krishna's role in the research endeavors. Karanjia writes in a response, "Dr. Mishra, for instance, interprets Kundalini as divine grace impossible for science to apprehend or engineer. With all respect due to his view, we hold to Pandit Gopi Krishna's more rational and scientific biological evolutionary thesis, since it was the latter that inspired these articles." Pretty clear. This example highlights how Karanjia presented a facade of critical examination while persistently endorsing and promoting Krishna's viewpoint. Before its official launch, Blitz featured a preceding article, perhaps aiming to arouse curiosity. The headline on page 1 of the February 28 issue of Blitz reads, "Indira Gandhi and Kundalini, Durga aimed with Shakti." The main objective of the article pertained to promoting Gandhi's politics and analyzing how her presumably activated Kundalini accounted for her political achievements. Karanjia, who wrote the article, mused that Gandhi's political success rested on her evolved consciousness, a manifestation of Kundalini Shakti. Following Karan Singh's argument, the accomplishments of India's prime minister and perhaps her entire administration derived from the activation of Kundalini. India's glory and her global hegemony would therefore first and foremost depend on this mysterious force. Karan Singh's adulation of Gandhi sheds further light on the political motivations behind the Kundalini Yoga series. Karan Singh emphasizes Gandhi's role in India's divine mission to disseminate knowledge about Kundalini. He aimed to elevate Gandhi's already pretty privileged status from a member of India's most powerful elite to a leader driven by her activated Kundalini energy, effectively placing her in the elevated group of what he called twice-borns. In this context, Karan Singh suggested that Gandhi's administration must be associated with Kundalini to enhance its supremacy. The presumed rediscovery of Kundalini, as promoted in Blitz and attributed to Krishna, provided the religious underpinnings for Gandhi's government and thus carried significant political weight. Consequently, the February Blitz article marked a key event in the nationalization of Kundalini. Let me finish with a few concluding remarks. In this presentation, I have discussed the nationalization and political use of Kundalini against the backdrop of Kundalini research. As my research demonstrated, the increasing fascination with Kundalini on a global scale motivated Indian politicians and journalists to begin reclaiming what was now glorified as an emblem of Indian cultural heritage. The hype revolving around Kundalini research peaked in India during the mid-1970s and gradually decayed after Gandhi's electoral defeat in 1977 and ultimately with Krishna's death in 1984. During this short period, Krishna's theories on Kundalini enjoyed national recognition, stimulating, or at least anticipating, research projects at Indian medical institutions. Consequently, the Indian tabloid Blitz portrayed Krishna as a national hero and his international collaborations as momentous deeds. Throughout Karan Singh's cover stories, he depicted Kundalini as a marginal or even forgotten esoteric concept confined to specific religious domains and isolated publications. At the same time, however, he underscored how global interest had substantially increased as a reaction to Krishna's quote-unquote sensational findings. Considering Kundalini's earlier appropriation by philosophical scientism and Hindu reformism, Krishna's interpretation of Kundalini is not the great pioneering achievement it claims to be. Therefore, it is imperative to underscore that Krishna, while assuming a central role in Kundalini research, built on discourse carried forward by South Asian theosophists, Hindu reformers, and Hindu nationalists since the 19th century. Karan Singh nonetheless framed the planned Kundalini research endeavors under the guidance of Gopi Krishna as, quote-unquote, a development of truly historic proportions and of truly global significance, end quote. Moreover, he emphasized the singular importance of conducting research in India, Kundalini's alleged homeland. Based on these assertions, Karan Singh, along with Krishna, Singh, and Gandhi, essentialized Kundalini as an ancient Hindu principle. Accordingly, the history of modern Kundalini research provides valuable insights into the Hindu nationalist appropriation of Kundalini. Thank you for your attention.
Uh, Hello. Thank you so much, Marlene, for your wonderful presentation. Yes, thanks for stop sharing the slides as well. Now we can see you. Awesome. Lovely. So, can I remind people that you can put comments into the Q&A function on the webinar? So please take your time, have a think. What questions would you like to bring to Marlene while we have her with us? I was writing lots of notes and I have lots of thoughts, and I don't know if I can kind of be coherent with this. I really enjoyed that presentation. I hadn't heard you speak about that aspect of Kundalini before. Like one of the questions that I always have, which is not really, it's probably not a question for you now, perhaps, because you're working on this very modern period. I'm always excited by the long-running appeal that Kundalini has as a concept for the last 1,500 years. That there has been this enduring appeal that has some similarities in particularly in the term Kundalini that is used across this time. So I suppose I see your research as fitting within that much wider trend. I don't know if you have anything to say about the kind of longer history of Kundalini. So did you want to say anything, or should I jump into my first question?
Um, I mean, I guess like there's like two different strands. Like there is like an actual longer tradition of Kundalini, like the tradition that traces back to South Asian yoga and tantric texts, where we can actually trace the history of this concept. And then there's like this imagined history of Kundalini as like carried forward by Hindu nationalists. And I think like we're talking about two very different ideas of Kundalini, and that's something to keep in mind. Like on the
Mhm.
one hand, there's these ideas that they're traceable and they're varied, but there's actually written source material, and the other one is merely an imagination. So I guess that's just something that I would like to keep folks in mind.
Yeah. So today you were particularly talking about the science of Kundalini, the scientification of Kundalini, and this desire to use empirical experiments to analyze the Kundalini experience. Yet in what you've presented to us, it appears that that objective was more rhetoric than reality. Because I wanted to know what are the methodologies that scientists would take to explore, to validate, to understand the Kundalini experience. So, were any of the people that you've looked at you actually deploying experimental models, or was it all
Mm.
rhetoric?
Mhm. Yeah, so I would say that starting from the what I call the second wave of Kundalini scientification, that would be like in the early 20th century, we see how Kundalini enters the laboratory. So there's like physicians and other scientists who were interested to actually find empirical evidence for Kundalini, and they used laboratories and research subjects in laboratories to find empirical evidence. So we're actually talking about like lab testings, and then in the longer run, in the from the 60s onwards, we see more and more technological instruments in use to find empirical evidence. So that's particularly interesting when we're looking at the development of biofeedback testings and several protagonists who come up with like their own machines because they're not satisfied with what's on the market, so they're like, okay, I just gonna invent my own machine to find empirical evidence. So that's like a lot what I've found in my research, that there's a lot of technological or the use of technological devices for empirical yoga research. But obviously, like we're building on a much on a longer tradition of empirical yoga research, where Kundalini research is only like one marginal strand. So that's always important to remember when we talk about Kundalini research. We're not talking about the topic that has been researched most when considering empirical yoga research.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jackie, do you have any questions that you'd like
Mhm.
to or reflections you'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ruth, and thanks, Marlene, for an absolutely fascinating research uh, lecture presenting your doctoral research, which was just um, quite thorough and reveals a lot about this period. I did have a question. What did you think? I know Gopi Krishna basically suggested that his whole interest was initiated by a personal experience. But I wonder what he was calling upon, like he was coming from Kashmir. You said, did did your research reveal any insight into where or why he grabbed onto this concept and thought his experience was attributable to that type of historical concept?
Yeah,
Thank
that's a
you.
very good question. Thank you, Jackie. It's basically if you open his autobiography, he talks a lot about this process itself because his autobiography, like it only a very short paragraph in the beginning, like describes his experience, and then the rest of the book talks about the process, which is remarkable that he tries to capture 30 years of experience and of like trying to make sense of this experience within the book. And so there he also talks about how he was not sure what was going on with him, and that only like after a while it became clear to him that what was going on within his body might be the awakening of Kundalini. We've also seen great research on the Gopi Krishna reaching out to esteemed teachers such as Sri Aurobindo, like in the recently published book by Anya Foxen and Shravana Bhattakativarma, The Serpent's Tail. There we read about Gopi Krishna reaching out to Sri Aurobindo. That's a great piece of archival research that I was very glad to find. And then I think like Gopi Krishna's autobiography is just the best source to understand how his process, went underway. I would suggest.
Okay, I wondered whether Jackie had a follow-up. All right, we've got quite a few questions that are coming in the chat, so let me go and see what we've got there. So Daniel Perez de Silva, thanks you for your beautiful presentation. And I guess in your presentation, this is me, not him. You spoke about scholar practitioner, practitioner scholar, insider outsider, and things like that. And this is the so Daniel is asking about your own experience. He said, would you mind sharing your own experience with the theme of Kundalini? Have you ever experienced this biological mechanism that Gopi Krishna calls Kundalini? Did your personal experience influence your research?
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that question. It comes up a lot when I talk about Kundalini. So my interest in Kundalini is based in my interest as a historian. So I'm not a practitioner. I initially was involved in a research project on energy healing, and that's how I had to find an energy of my choice. And this is how initially, like Kundalini got became part of my life because it was like really like a central aspect of my life these past 5 6 years. But and I feel very dearly to Kundalini, but I would not consider myself a practitioner. This does not mean that I haven't tried all sorts of practices because I'm very curious to see what my research subjects are going through. So I've tried quite a bit, but I would consider myself as a historian.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question from Eleonora from Argentina, who's very happy to see you and says you're looking much, much younger and thinks it's your Kundalini experience. And she asks, what's the what's the Sanskritic spelling for Kundalini? She asks, I think she's asking whether it's long E on the end.
Could you respond to that, Ruth?
Well, so in the standard transliteration of Kundalini, it's cerebral N and D, so dots underneath the N and D, and then long E ending, which in the kind of IAST standardized Sanskrit, it's a dash over the E, which is the long E ending. So it's the feminine, and then the in is possessive. So it's she who possesses coils, as Marleen said right at the beginning. But of course, well, back to Marleen for why she wouldn't use Sanskritic spelling in her.
Yeah, so I'm not a South Asianist. I'm a religious studies scholar focused on the history of religion. So I have like when I'm looking at Kundalini, I'm looking at the reception history and at the transmission history of Kundalini from South Asia to Europe back. So like all the transcultural flows that are involved in this history. And that's why I very gratefully rely on South Asianists like Ruth, um, who are working on pre-modern Kundalini material. I'm mainly looking at modern Kundalini material, and that's why it could have been also me asking that very question.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few questions from Abhishek Tripathi. I don't know if you can see the chat, Marleen. It's in the Q&A portion. You can click on it at the bottom. I'll start reading, but you might want a reference because I'm not quite sure that I understand. So he says, a beautiful presentation. Thanks ever so much. And then his first question breaks down into three. So this attempt of Kundalini research into Gopi Krishna, did your research findings suggest that which one of the following emerges as prominent in your research? Okay, so I think he's asking, which is the most prominent in your research? One, the contestation of who owns Kundalini research in Southeast Asia. Two, whether it's an empirical investigation of an ancient practice of Kundalini as a validated practice of well-being. Three, a purely political motive to enhance the image of Indira Gandhi.
Phew, maybe a little bit of each. I wouldn't say it's like a purely political motivation because, like what I presented today, also keep in mind it's like a very specific case study. So that's like not all the engagement with Kundalini in South Asia is limited to political motivations. That was just a very different lens that I've looked at. I could have also looked at the scientification of Kundalini in South Asia, looking at like not so much like the political motivations, but more the motivations of scientists, physicians, and authors trying to find trying to find empirical evidence. So I. And in that case, also it's not exclusively number two, an empirical investigation. So I think what could be said is that it really depends on the lens. It really depends on what aspect of Kundalini's reception history and of its transformation you're looking at. There's like so many different concepts, and I think I've emphasized in the lecture that you can't really consider Kundalini concepts, be it pre-modern, be it modern, as unified or as like a single concept. And that's why it is so important to always emphasize through which lens one is analyzing the transformation of Kundalini, and then also which school are you looking at, which historical period. I mean, we could also look at the transformation of Kundalini through the eyes of Yogi Bhajan and the 3HO, and that would be a completely different story. I'm mainly looking at the history from Gopi Krishna's eyes, and that's why the political use of Kundalini comes into play, as he was collaborating with the Gandhi administration. I don't know if that somehow.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. People can pop follow-up questions in the Q&A if they'd like. But Abhishek did have a second part to his question, which is, can we see in your research a parallel to Jordan Peterson's shift from purely psychological or archetypical interpretations of the Bible to more personal reflections on grace, mercy, and faith after his health issues in the last few years?
Since I'm not so familiar with Jordan Peterson's research ideas, I don't feel so comfortable to respond to that question, but I'd be happy to look into that. And then, Abhishek, if you reach out to me, let's talk about this in a follow-up conversation.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that's all that we've got in the chat that I can see at the moment. Abhishek says thanks. I'm sure Jackie's got more questions. Maybe I can just ask, like to contextualize what you've been talking about today. You've talked about the sort of mid to late 1970s and this push for scientific research that kind of didn't really come to fruition in India, but the way you were setting it up sounded like a bit of a sort of not an arms race, but like a technological race, a sort of geopolitical race with other parts of the world to kind of promote Kundalini research. And obviously you focused on your South Asian materials today. So I wonder whether you could put the Kundalini research that you spoke about today within those broader geographic research projects into Kundalini scientification.
Yeah, it's very good, like how you frame it as like a race, because this is definitely like how the figures in South Asia considered it. Like they definitely felt like, okay, there's like interest into Kundalini research, and other countries might take the lead from us. So that's definitely something like that that is like that is something that we see in South Asia among politicians. I do not think that this was a main concern anywhere else, because also there was not another country that would kind of claim Kundalini as like their national emblem. So that's really something very specific Indian and very specific of that period, I would say. So all the other aspects of Kundalini research, and I've mentioned Europe, North America, Japan, that's mainly individuals who tried to carry Kundalini research forward. So it was not that I can think of any like government-funded research endeavors. It was usually like individuals, and sometimes also several individuals who would collaborate on research projects. That's definitely something we see, but not large scale research projects as we saw in South Asia. And then also, I mean, like as I've made clear throughout my lecture, like there were like endeavors to research Kundalini, but then it also did not really lead anywhere, because then there were other priorities of the administration. Then there was an election that was lost, and there was a new government who had different priorities. So you can see in South Asia like how, while there were larger hopes for big scale Kundalini research, it wasn't really what participants anticipated it. So yeah, I would say like that Kundalini research on a global scale is interconnected through the work of individuals, but you can't see any government-funded Kundalini research as we saw it in South Asia.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Karina Sahib Saab has given us questions. She says, thank you so much. Very illuminating. Can you say shortly if you did research on 3HO and where it can be found? And with greetings from Germany.
Well, so when it comes to 3HO, I would always recommend the work of Philip de Slip, who did like the most elaborated research on Yogi Bhajan and 3HO. I did cover Yogi Bhajan in my dissertation, just as one example of another yogi who and an author who traveled from South Asia to the world to disseminate his distinct ideas of Kundalini. And you know, like with Yogi Bhajan, it's interesting because he also brings that Sikh component into the game, and there we find again like very different ideas of Kundalini, like Kundalini related to the hair, for example, and I mean, like his Kundalini yoga is he's just like, he was like a marketing genius. So nowadays, when somebody's talking about Kundalini yoga, it's usually Yogi Bhajan's Kundalini yoga that we are talking about. So, or that people talk about. So yeah, so I think. I think Yogi Bhajan would feel like another lecture series, probably. Why he was interesting for me in my research was because he was competing quite a bit with Gopi Krishna's or the 3HO, and the research associated with 3HO was competing quite a bit with Gopi Krishna's Kundalini Research Foundations. It was more that the collaborators of Gopi Krishna were not very happy with how Gopi Krishna was presented or underrepresented and not taken serious by the members of 3HO, because you have to understand that the 3HO was a really big international organization that had a lot of funding, had a lot of members, whereas Gopi Krishna was working on a really small budget, was working with a comparatively small fellowship, and still aimed to conduct large scale Kundalini research. So that's why there was like an imbalance between the two organizations, and there were significant conflicts. I mean, they never, like Gopi Krishna and Yogi Bhajan, never really. I think they've never met in person, or maybe they've met somewhere at an event, but not intentionally, from what I remember. And but the members were like or the followers were meeting each other at events, and you could tell from archival resources that if they were not necessarily friendly with each other. Yeah, I guess that's what I have to say. No.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so your research elsewhere has looked at like the San Francisco Kundalini Clinic. You've looked at the work of Lee Sanella. You've looked at the work of the Groffs in like spiritual emergencies, and but I want to, and this is possibly an unfair question, and just tell me to back off if it is. But just in like bringing the story right up to the present, I wondered to what extent Kundalini is still or is now being used in a medical therapeutic research context as an explanation for spiritual experiences, both adverse and sort of beneficial, transcendental, however people phrase them, so not necessarily bad. Do you think that there is still a kind of drive to use Kundalini as a explanatory term in the contemporary period?
Well, the contemporary period is not exactly like my research focus. I tried a little bit to keep up with what's going on nowadays, and I've been in contact with with a couple from California who actually operate in the tradition of Gopi Krishna. So they consider themselves as as carrying the tradition forward, and they are collaborating with a scientist trying to writing a research article on the scientific implications and the biological and the physiological implications of Kundalini. So that's just a very small example, but I think it shows us that there's still interest both among practitioners and also among scientists to, in a way, continue to collaborate and gain new insights. But I would really consider that as a very marginal development. I mean, it was a pretty marginal development also in the 20th century, but that's the only example I can think of right now, since I kind of stopped looking at the material at the 1990s. It's too contemporary for me after that. But yeah, it would be very interesting to look into it. I mean, you've mentioned the Groffs, and obviously they've mainly worked at Esalen, and during my fellowship at Esalen, I spent there like around 3 months, and I noticed that Kundalini is still a topic. It is still practiced, but aside from that, like there's not a whole bunch of courses on Kundalini. There is like definitely like not any like scientific endeavor or like a psychological endeavor with it. So I would say that it's not a major topic, but I might be wrong. I might just stop talking now.
Okay, I kind of want to go to like final questions around sort of future directions in research, but I think I'll pass to Jackie.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. I hope that my earphones are still working then.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yeah, great. So I just wondered, Marleen, and it might lead into your future research area, but I wondered why this sort of it's like a repeating trope, if you like, when you look at books on practitioner-driven books. They often start, if they want to gain sort of a place of authority, they often start with this idea that I had this experience and I've achieved a certain level, and it's through this experience that I therefore can tell my story. And it brought to mind when you were saying that Gopi Krishna was able to do that and then popularize his system. And then we see, like in the 90s, when there was this sort of emergence of Buddhism and in contemporary Western society, we had like The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle's book, and he did the same sort of thing. Like he dropped it, went viral. It was like this whole idea that his unique personal experience somehow gave him a voice of authority to spread this sort of new spiritual ways. I just wonder whether you had any insight into that from religious studies perspective. Why do we sort of feel so captured by that type of description?
So, do you mean the authority of science, or like of the personal experience?
Yeah, no, it's the personal experience. It's sort of one that cannot be tested or verified, but there's just self-claimed, like a self-claimed experience. And often these sort of books aimed at practitioners start with that, right? They start with this: I've achieved this experience. It was unexpected, or it was and then that leads to the ability to then teach a system. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because I guess if you have this personal experience, like you know that or you claim that you have this experience, but nobody really can verify it. So I guess like there's this discrepancy between like you claiming something and people believing you or not believing you. And so if people do not believe you, you need to find some strategies like of how to make your claim more valid. And I think this is how the scientification of religious ideas, why this became so popular among practitioners, because it was a tool of how to communicate, or of how to show the validity and the truth of one's own experience to a broader public who would not be so easily convinced. So I think. And I mean, like the scientification of religion, like that's nothing that is limited to the 20th century. That's something that started already in the 19th century and definitely continues until today. And this, I feel like it is kind of like something that is also anticipating like the whole discourse of practitioner scholars, which we've already talked about today. But yeah, it's only one way of trying to have one's own personal experience distributed among a broader crowd, a broader public. Like there's also different tools or different ways of how to communicate one's own experience. I mean, I think for a lot of practitioners also, it's not only difficult to communicate their experience to others, but even to themselves. And that's where Gopi Krishna is such a wonderful example, because in his autobiography, he really explains how finding meaning was like a decade-long painful process. And I think this is something that really spoke to a lot of people, because or a lot of people who believed that they were undergoing a Kundalini experience, and they were unsure, and they were like, maybe yes, maybe not. And so it was very helpful that Gopi Krishna just not only talked about, yes, this is what happened to me, but also, help, what's going on, I need help. I don't know, I'm one day I'm sure I have this experience, one day I'm unsure. So yeah, I think this process of not knowing is also an important aspect of a personal experience of our religious protagonists.
Yeah. Okay. So it's right. It seems clear to me that Kundalini is a topic that practitioners find really appealing and relevant and a really helpful topic. Yet we don't have many scholarly treatments devoted to Kundalini. We have Lillian Silburn's The Energy of the Depth. Anya Foxon and Shravan Borgataki have just recently published The Serpent's Tail, so much more recent work on Kundalini. And now we're going to have your book coming out in due course. So I've got two questions. One is, can you just like introduce us to your book project and tell you when we're going to be able to read it? And then two is like, where next for Kundalini academic research?
Okay, first, so my book projects, it's actually two projects that are looking at Kundalini, are based on my dissertation. But I decided to split my dissertation in two book projects since, I mean, first of all, it's way too big for people to read. I don't want to do this to anyone. My supervisor was suffering enough, and my external reviewers. So one of the projects will basically look exclusively at Gopi Krishna. I consider him, and I think you heard this from my lecture, I consider him as such a key figure when looking at the modern transformation of Kundalini. And I mean, there has been wonderful research on Gopi Krishna in the SAT publication by Anya and Shravana. I have published on Gopi Krishna before, but I feel like there hasn't been a scholarly book that is exclusively dedicated to Gopi Krishna's history and his role in the transformation of Kundalini. And so this is what I hope to do in the first book project, and the second book project will look at North American Kundalini research. So that would be like the Kundalini Clinic, that would be Kundalini at the Esalen Institute, that would be Kundalini at the Californian Institute of Integral Studies. So it would be like if you want like more of a specific case study of a specific episode of Kundalini's modern transformation and also scientification within the North American context. And as a little side gig, I will also look at Hiroshi Motoyama's Kundalini research. He's the one that started Kundalini research in Japan. Again, not mainly Kundalini research, it was more like a broader subtle body, not even yoga, but subtle body research project. And one aspect of these research endeavors was also looking at Kundalini. So I just want to include him in the story and to make people understand like what important role he played, because he was actually the main motivation for the Kundalini Clinic to even come into play. But I mean, that's too much to mention now. But these are the two publication projects I have in line. And I mean, I know that There's other Kundalini research, other Kundalini publications on the way of some of colleagues. And yeah, what was your second question?
Like where are the gaps? Where next in Kundalini, academic Kundalini research? Like what do we not know? What, yeah.
So I'm dying to see some Kundalini, like some research on contemporary Kundalini material, because as I've mentioned, like that's kind of like my blind spot. Like it's even worse than the pre-modern stuff. So I would really I'm really looking forward to see some research into contemporary developments, particularly Kundalini in social media. I mean, we all know that social media rules the world. So it would be wonderful to see like how Kundalini continues to change, continues to transform after like these kind of like traveling swamis of the 20th century stopped traveling because they're traveling online. So that's something that I would be very interested to see. And then, I mean, we do have like the research into Yogi Bhajan, but there's like other teachers who could be looked at. I mean, you Urban did this great research into Osho, but I feel like there could be still more focus on Osho's Kundalini interpretations. I feel like that's something that that there's still like more potential to it. And then whatever there is in pre-modern Kundalini research, I'm not the one to ask, but I'm sure there's still a lot of work to do. And maybe they're gonna be your work, Ruth, or some of our like colleagues. But yeah, as you can see, there's like still a lot to do, and I feel like I mean we co-convened like two great panels at two international conferences last year, exclusively dedicated to Kundalini, with several scholars from around the world contributing, and that just really ensured me that Kundalini is a topic that is very popular right now, and there's a lot of research to be done, and yeah, so exciting times for Kundalini research.
I agree. I think there's some really exciting thing. There feels like a buzz around it, and of course we've got Yoga Darshan Yoga Sadhana, the conference coming up in May, and we've got the keynote on Kundalini, as well as a panel on the history of Kundalini, and we've got a panel on adverse experiences of meditation techniques. So Kundalini comes into that as well. So yeah, it feels like there's some good stuff going on. Right, I feel like I've kept you here for ages and just kept asking you stuff. So I think we can probably come to a close. Now I know that we've got Mark Singleton speaking for the SOAS Centre of Yoga Studies in 3 weeks' time. I'm kind of looking at Jackie I'll hand over to her. Confirm.
No, that's fine. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Marleen, for your fascinating presentation, and Ruth for the chairing today. It's been great to have you both talk about this subject, which you're both so passionate about. So that was very visible. Yes, our next topic is with Mark Singleton. We haven't promoted that yet, but we will, and it will. No, it's okay. It's up there, but we haven't sort of sent out the link or anything. So yes, stay tuned for that. And also hope to see you all in Paris. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you.
So much.
Good night.
Thank you.